The gunshot echoed through the vast plains of Texas as Olivia Reed's horse galloped away from the only place she'd ever called home. San Bernardino had promised a new beginning, but it had delivered something far more dangerous: love. Tears streamed down her face as the dusty trail stretched before her, wondering if she'd made the right decision, leaving behind the man who had claimed her heart. Behind her, in the distance, stood a weathered cabin where Randall Porter remained, his hand still raised in a frozen farewell. It was the spring of 1878 when Olivia had first arrived in San Bernardino, Texas. The town wasn't large by any standard, but it bustled with enough activity to keep folks busy and gossip flowing. Fresh from losing her parents to influenza in Kansas City, 20-year-old Olivia had inherited enough money to start anew. She'd chosen this particular town because her late mother's cousin lived there, though upon arrival she discovered the woman had passed 6 months prior. The stagecoach dropped her off in front of the town's only hotel, the Prickly Pear Inn. Dust swirled around her ankles as she stepped down, clutching her carpet bag and trying to appear more confident than she felt. "Need help with that, miss?" A deep voice caught her attention. Olivia turned to find herself looking up into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen. The man before her wore a weathered Stetson, and his tall frame cast a shadow that provided momentary relief from the relentless Texas sun. "Thank you, but I can manage," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. He nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Suit yourself. Name's Randall Porter." "Most folks call me Rand." He extended his hand. "Olivia Reed," she replied, briefly accepting his handshake. His palm was calloused, warm against her own. "New to San Bernardino?" he asked, though it was hardly a question given her obvious travel attire and the stagecoach pulling away behind them. "Yes, I was meant to stay with a relative, but—" She hesitated, suddenly aware of how precarious her situation truly was. Rand seemed to understand without her having to explain further. "The Prickly Pear's a decent enough place. Mrs. Holloway runs it clean, if a bit pricey. If you're looking to stay long-term, there's a boarding house down on Cottonwood Street that might suit you better." Olivia nodded, grateful for the information. "Thank you, Mr. Porter." "Just Rand," he corrected, tipping his hat. "Welcome to San Bernardino. Miss Reed?" That first encounter had been brief, but Olivia would later recall it as the moment her life in the West truly began. Within a week, Olivia had secured a position at the town's general store, working for Walter and Martha Camden. The elderly couple had taken an immediate liking to her, and Martha's motherly nature had helped ease the ache of Olivia's recent losses. The work wasn't difficult, mostly inventory, helping customers and keeping the books, but it allowed her to interact with virtually everyone in San Bernardino, including Rand Porter, who seemed to require supplies with surprising frequency. "Another pound of coffee, Mr. Porter?" Olivia asked with a raised eyebrow as he approached the counter one afternoon in late May. "Didn't you purchase the same just 3 days ago?" Rand's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Clumsy with the canister, spilled half of it." The lie was transparent, and they both knew it. "Of course," she said, unable to prevent a small smile from forming as she measured out the coffee beans. "Heard there's a social at the church Saturday evening," Rand mentioned casually, leaning against the counter. "Thought you might be attending?" Olivia concentrated on the beans, trying to ignore the quickening of her pulse. "Martha mentioned it. I haven't decided yet." "It would be a good way to meet more folks in town," he suggested. "I could escort you if you'd like." She looked up then, studying his face. He wasn't traditionally handsome in the way city men often were, but there was something compelling about his features. Honesty etched into the lines around his eyes, strength in the set of his jaw. "Thank you, but I believe I'll go with the Camdens," she replied, wrapping his purchase in brown paper, "though I'm sure I'll see you there." If he was disappointed, he hid it well. "I'll look forward to it, Miss Reed." The social had been her first real introduction to San Bernardino society. The church hall was decorated with wildflowers, and a small band played while couples danced and others chatted over punch and pie. Olivia wore her best dress, a sky blue gown with white trim that had once belonged to her mother. Martha had helped arrange her auburn hair in a style that was fashionable yet modest. True to his word, Rand was there, and Olivia couldn't help but notice how different he looked cleaned up, wearing a proper suit rather than his usual work clothes. He tipped his hat when their eyes met across the room, but didn't immediately approach, giving her space to mingle with others. It was only after she had danced with the banker's son and chatted with several of the town's matrons that Rand finally made his way to her side. "May I have this dance, Miss Reed?" he asked, extending his hand as the band began a slower tune. She hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. "You may, Mr. Porter." His hand rested properly at her waist as they moved to the music, maintaining a respectable distance between them. "You look beautiful tonight," he said quietly. "Thank you," she replied, feeling a warmth rise to her cheeks. "You clean up rather well yourself." Rand chuckled. "Don't get used to it. I'm much more at home in the saddle than in these stiff clothes." "And what is it you do, Mr. Porter? You've never mentioned." "I raise horses," he answered. "Got a small ranch about 5 miles west of town. Nothing fancy, but it's mine, free and clear." Olivia nodded, impressed despite herself. Owning land in this part of the country was no small accomplishment for a man who couldn't be more than 30. "And you?" he asked. "Do you plan to stay in San Bernardino long?" The question caught her off guard. I haven't thought that far ahead. For now it seems as good a place as any." Rand's eyes held hers. "I hope you'll find reason enough to stay." The music ended before she could formulate a response, and he escorted her back to where Martha stood, thanking her properly for the dance before moving away to speak with other townsfolk. "That young man has his eye on you," Martha commented, passing Olivia a cup of punch. "Nonsense," Olivia protested, though without much conviction. "He's just being friendly to a newcomer." Martha's knowing smile said otherwise. "Randall Porter isn't known for being particularly sociable, dear. He keeps to himself and his horses most of the time. Been that way since he returned from the war." Olivia glanced across the room where Rand stood in conversation with the blacksmith. "He fought in the war?" Martha nodded. "For the Union. Came back changed, as most did. Bought that land and has worked it hard ever since. Good man, though. Honest to a fault." Olivia considered this new information, watching as Rand laughed at something the blacksmith said. There was more to him than she'd initially thought. As spring turned to summer, Rand's visits to the general store became a regular occurrence. Sometimes he had legitimate purchases to make. Other times his excuses were flimsy at best. Olivia found herself looking forward to these encounters, even as she told herself she shouldn't. One particularly hot afternoon in July, he appeared at the store just before closing. "Mr. Porter," she greeted him, already reaching for the coffee canister out of habit. "Miss Reed," he nodded, but didn't approach the counter. "Actually, I was wondering if you might join me for supper at the hotel restaurant this evening. That is, if you don't have other plans." Olivia's hand stilled. This was different from their casual conversations or the dance at the social. This was a proper invitation. She hesitated, thinking of all the reasons she should decline, yet finding none compelling enough. "I would like that." "Thank you." His face brightened. "Wonderful. Shall I call for you at the boarding house around 6? "That would be fine," she agreed, suddenly aware of Martha pretending not to listen from the back room. After Rand left, Martha emerged with a knowing smile. "Well, well." "It's just supper," Olivia insisted, busying herself with tidying the counter. "Of course it is, dear," Martha replied, not bothering to hide her amusement. "Just be careful with that one." Olivia paused. "Why do you say that?" Martha's expression grew more serious. "Because I think he could break your heart if you let him. Or more accurately, you could break his. He's not a man who gives his affections easily. But when he does," she shrugged, "just be sure of yourself, that's all I'm saying." That evening, Rand arrived at the boarding house precisely at 6, wearing clean clothes and with his hair still damp from washing. He offered Olivia his arm as they walked the short distance to the hotel restaurant, making casual conversation about the weather and town gossip. The prickly pear's dining room wasn't fancy, but it was the closest thing San Bernardino had to fine dining. A few other patrons nodded in greeting as they were seated at a small table near the window. "I recommend the steak," Rand offered after they'd been given menus. "Mrs. Holloway's cook has a way with beef that's unmatched in these parts." Olivia smiled. "I'll trust your judgment on that." After ordering, they fell into an awkward silence that neither seemed to know how to break. Finally, Rand cleared his throat. "I realize I don't know much about your life before San Bernardino," he said. "If you don't mind my asking, what brought you all the way from Kansas City?" Olivia traced the pattern on the tablecloth with her fingertip. "My parents died of influenza last winter. There was nothing left for me there after that." "I'm sorry," Rand said softly. "That's a hard road to travel alone." "Yes, well, we all have our burdens to bear," she replied, then immediately regretted the brittleness in her tone. "I apologize. It's still difficult to discuss." Rand nodded in understanding. "No need to apologize. Loss is something I'm familiar with." A shadow passed over his features, and Olivia suspected he was thinking of the war. "Martha mentioned you served," she said gently. He nodded. 4 years with the 8th Illinois Cavalry. Saw things I wish I hadn't." He took a sip of water. "But that's behind me now." "Is that when you came to Texas?" "After a fashion. Wandered a bit first. Worked cattle drives, tried my hand at mining. Nothing felt right until I found this place." His expression lightened. "There's something about this land, harsh as it can be, that speaks to me." "I can understand that," Olivia replied, surprised to realize she meant it. Despite the heat and dust and primitive conditions, there was a raw beauty to the Texas landscape that had begun to work its way into her heart. Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. The steak was indeed excellent, as Rand had promised. "And what about you?" Rand asked after they'd eaten in companionable silence for a few minutes. "What do you hope to find here in San Bernardino?" Olivia considered the question. "Peace, I suppose. A place to belong." She smiled ruefully. "That sounds rather vague, doesn't it?" "Not at all," Rand replied. "I think that's what most of us are looking for when it comes down to it." Their eyes met across the table, and Olivia felt a flutter of something dangerous and thrilling in her chest. There was an honesty to Rand Porter that drew her in, despite her best efforts to maintain her distance. As the summer progressed, Rand's courtship became more deliberate. He took her on rides around the countryside, showing her the beauty of the Texas landscape. They attended church together on Sundays, followed by dinner with the Camdens or at the hotel restaurant. Sometimes they simply sat on the boarding house porch in the evenings, talking as the sun set. Olivia found herself opening up to him in ways she hadn't with anyone since her parents' deaths. She told him about her childhood in Kansas City, her father's work as a lawyer, her mother's love of literature. In turn, Rand shared stories of his own upbringing in Illinois, his decision to enlist, and the nightmares that sometimes still plagued him from his time in the war. It was during one of their rides in late August that Rand first showed her his ranch. The main house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and sturdy walls. Several outbuildings dotted the property, including a large barn where he kept his prized horses. "It's not much," he said as they dismounted in front of the house, "but I've been adding to it bit by bit." "It's wonderful," Olivia replied honestly, admiring the care evident in every detail. "You've built something to be proud of here." Rand looked pleased at her approval. "Would you like to see the horses? I've got a new foal born just last week." The barn was cool and fragrant with the smell of hay. Rand led her to a stall where a mare stood protectively over a wobbly-legged foal. "She's beautiful," Olivia breathed, watching as the foal nuzzled against its mother. Rand corrected with a smile. "And yes, he's going to be a fine stallion someday." Olivia reached out hesitantly, and Rand guided her hand to gently stroke the foal's neck. The animal's coat was soft beneath her fingers, and she laughed delightedly when the foal pressed against her touch. "What will you name him?" she asked. Rand looked at her thoughtfully. "I was thinking, Hope." Something in his voice made her look up. and she found him watching her with an intensity that caused her breath to catch. They were standing very close now, their hands nearly touching on the foal's neck. "Rand," she began, not sure what she meant to say. He moved slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but she remained still as he leaned down and pressed his lips gently to hers. The kiss was brief, tender, a question rather than a demand. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. "I'm falling in love with you, Olivia Reed," he said quietly. "I think I have been since the moment you stepped off that stagecoach." The declaration should have frightened her, perhaps a part of it did, but there was also an undeniable thrill at hearing the words spoken aloud. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. Rand took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "You don't need to say anything right now. I just wanted you to know where I stand." That night, lying in her bed at the boarding house, Olivia found herself torn between joy and terror. She was falling in love with Rand Porter may have already fallen, but the thought of giving her heart completely to another person filled her with dread. She had lost everyone she'd ever loved. The pain of those losses was still fresh, still raw. How could she risk experiencing that again? Yet the alternative, walking away from what was growing between them, seemed equally unbearable. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Olivia's relationship with Rand deepened. They were now widely regarded as a couple in San Bernardino, drawing knowing smiles from the townsfolk whenever they were seen together. Martha had taken to dropping hints about wedding plans, which Olivia steadfastly ignored even as the idea planted itself in her mind. It was on the first truly cold evening in October that everything changed. Rand had invited Olivia to dinner at his ranch the first time she would be alone with him there, without the propriety of daylight. She had accepted after only minor hesitation, trusting him completely by now. The house was warm and welcoming when she arrived, a fire crackling in the hearth and the smell of stew simmering on the stove. Rand had clearly gone to considerable effort, setting the table with what appeared to be his best dishes, and even placing a small vase of late-blooming wildflowers as a centerpiece. "This is lovely," Olivia said as he took her coat. Rand looked pleased but nervous. "I wanted tonight to be special." They ate by lamplight, the conversation flowing easily between them as it always did. After the meal, they moved to sit before the fire, Rand in his armchair and Olivia on the small sofa adjacent to it. "I have something to ask you," Rand said after a moment of comfortable silence, reaching into his pocket. Olivia's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. Rand moved from the chair to kneel before her, taking her hand in his. "Olivia Reed," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion clear in his eyes. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light back into a world I thought would always be shadowed by the past." He opened his palm to reveal a simple gold ring. "I'm asking you to be my wife, to build a life here with me." The world seemed to narrow to just this moment, the warmth of the fire, the earnestness in Rand's blue eyes, the weight of what he was offering. And suddenly, all the fears Olivia had been holding at bay came rushing forward. Marriage, a lifetime commitment, the risk of devastating loss. I can't," she whispered, pulling her hand away and standing abruptly. "I'm sorry, Rand. I just can't." His expression shifted from hope to confusion to hurt. "Olivia, what's wrong? If it's too soon." "It's not that," she interrupted, wrapping her arms around herself. "I care for you deeply, but I can't do this. I can't risk it." Rand stood slowly. "Risk what?" "Losing you." The words burst from her. "Everyone I've ever loved has been taken from me. My parents, even distant relatives. I came here with nothing, no one. And then I found you, and I started to hope, but..." Tears were flowing freely now. "What if something happens to you? What if there's another war, or you get thrown from a horse or fall ill? I can't go through that pain again. I won't survive it." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Olivia," he said gently, reaching for her, but she stepped back. "I'm sorry. I have to go." She grabbed her coat and hurried to the door. "Wait," Rand called after her. "It's dark. At least let me ride with you back to town." "No," she said firmly. I need to be alone, please. The ride back to town was cold and miserable, matching the turmoil in Olivia's heart. By morning, she had made her decision. She gave notice at the general store, packed her belongings, and purchased a ticket on the next stagecoach headed east. Martha was devastated. Child, whatever has happened between you and Rand, surely it can be resolved. Running away solves nothing. I'm not running away, Olivia insisted, though they both knew it was a lie. I simply realize now that San Bernardino isn't where I belong after all. And where do you belong, if not with people who care for you? Martha challenged. Olivia had no answer for that. Word reached Rand quickly. News traveled fast in small towns. He appeared at the boarding house the evening before her scheduled departure, his face haggard with lack of sleep. Is it true? He asked without preamble when she met him on the porch. You're leaving tomorrow? Olivia nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Yes. Because of me? Because I asked you to marry me? No, she said, then sighed. Yes. Not in the way you think. Then explain it to me, he pleaded. Help me understand why you're running from something good, something real. Olivia finally looked at him. Because I'm afraid, Rand. I'm terrified of loving you completely and then losing you. I don't think I'm strong enough to survive that. Rand's expression softened. None of us know how much time we have, Olivia. But isn't that all the more reason to embrace love when we find it? To make the most of whatever days we're granted? His words resonated with a truth she couldn't deny, but the fear was too powerful. I'm sorry, she whispered. I've made up my mind. Rand looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. If you ever change your mind, he said quietly, you know where to find me. The next morning, he was there as the stagecoach prepared to depart. He didn't approach her or try to change her mind. He simply stood across the street, hat in hand, and raised it in silent farewell as the coach pulled away. Olivia cried all the way to Fort Worth. She ended up in New Orleans, finding work as a teacher in a small school. The city was vibrant and busy, so different from San Bernardino that she thought it would help her forget. But as weeks turned into months, she found herself thinking of Rand more, not less. At night, she dreamed of his ranch, of the foal he'd named Hope, of the life she might have had. The letter from Martha arrived in early spring of 1879. San Bernardino misses you, Martha wrote. Walter's arthritis makes it difficult for him to manage the store alone, and no one has your head for figures. There was no mention of Rand until the very end of the letter. Randall Porter still raises his horses, still keeps to himself mostly, still watches the eastbound stage when it arrives. Olivia read those lines over and over, her heart aching. She tried to imagine Rand waiting at the station each time a coach arrived from the east, looking for her face among the passengers. The image was both beautiful and painful. 3 more months passed before she received another letter from Martha. This one was brief and urgent. Randall has been shot. Cattle rustlers tried to steal his prized stallions. He fought them off but took a bullet. The doctor says he will live, but the recovery will be long. Thought you should know. Olivia read the letter and then sat very still, feeling as though the world had tilted beneath her. Rand had been shot. He could have died without ever knowing that she. The realization crashed over her with the force of a tidal wave. She loved him. She had been a fool to run from that love out of fear. Her hands shook as she packed her belongings that same day. Fear had driven her away from Rand, but now a different kind of fear, the fear of living the rest of her life without him, drove her back. The journey to San Bernardino seemed interminable. At each stop, Olivia worried that she would arrive too late, that Rand's condition might have worsened. By the time the stagecoach finally rolled into town, she was nearly frantic with anxiety. Martha was waiting for her at the station, her weathered face breaking into a smile of relief. "Thank God you've come," she said, embracing Olivia. "I prayed my letter would bring you back." "How is he?" Olivia asked urgently. "Rand, is he recovering?" Martha assured her. "Stubborn as a mule, refusing to stay in bed as the doctor ordered. He's back at his ranch already, though he's not fit to be working yet. I need to see him, Olivia said. Can I borrow a horse? Martha studied her face. Are you sure about this, child? That man's heart has been through enough. Olivia nodded firmly. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The ride to Rand's ranch was both familiar and strange. The landscape had changed with the seasons, but the feeling of rightness that settled over her as she approached his property was unchanged. She saw him before he saw her. He was sitting on his porch, arm in a sling, looking out over his land. Even from a distance, she could see he had lost weight, and there was a weariness to his posture that hadn't been there before. When he finally noticed the approaching rider, he stood slowly, shading his eyes against the setting sun. Olivia saw the moment he recognized her. His entire body went still. She dismounted at the foot of the porch steps, her legs trembling beneath her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. You came back, Rand finally said, his voice rough with emotion. I came back, Olivia confirmed, taking a step toward him. When I heard you were hurt, her voice broke. I'm all right, he assured her quickly. It looks worse than it is. Another silence fell between them, heavy with all that remained unsaid. I was wrong to leave, Olivia said at last. I was a coward. Rand shook his head. No, you were honest about your fears. I can't fault you for that. But I was wrong, she insisted, climbing the steps to stand before him. I thought I was protecting myself by running away from love, from the possibility of loss. But these months without you have taught me that there's no safety in that choice, only emptiness. Hope flickered in Rand's eyes, but he remained cautious. What are you saying, Olivia? She took a deep breath. I'm saying that I love you, Randall Porter. I'm saying that life is uncertain and sometimes cruel, but loving you is the only thing that makes sense to me now. She reached out to touch his face, her fingers tracing the new lines at the corners of his eyes. I'm saying that if your offer still stands, I'd like to accept it. For a heartbeat, Rand simply stared at her. Then, with his good arm, he pulled her to him, burying his face in her hair. I never stopped waiting for you, he murmured. I knew you'd find your courage. The gunshot that had so terrified Olivia in Martha's letter had in fact become the catalyst for her own bravery. She had fled from the possibility of losing Rand, only to discover that the greater loss was never truly having him at all. They were married in the San Bernardino church 2 weeks later, as soon as Rand could stand without pain for the duration of the ceremony. Martha wept openly, while Walter pretended his handkerchief was merely for the dust in the air. The entire town turned out to celebrate, seeming to understand that this union represented not just love, but redemption, the triumph of courage over fear. That evening, as they sat on the porch of what was now their home, watching the sun set over the land they would share, Olivia finally felt the peace she had been seeking since the day she stepped off the stagecoach. I was thinking about that foal, she said, her head resting against Rand's shoulder. Hope? How's he doing? Rand smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. Growing strong, just like his namesake. Olivia understood his meaning. Hope had indeed grown stronger in the foal, in Rand's patient waiting, and in her own heart as she had journeyed back to him. I used to think loving someone made you vulnerable, she mused. And it does, I suppose, but it also makes you stronger in ways I never imagined. That's the paradox of it, Rand agreed. The same love that can break your heart can also heal it. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over the simple gold band that now encircled her finger, the same ring she had once fled from. I can't promise you that life won't bring more hardships, Olivia, but I can promise you won't face them alone. That's all I need, she replied, and meant it. As the years passed, their love only deepened. They faced droughts and storms, both literal and metaphorical. They celebrated the birth of their first child, a son they named William, after Olivia's father. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth, who inherited her mother's auburn hair and her father's blue eyes. In time, Olivia came to understand that the courage to love wasn't about the absence of fear, but rather the willingness to embrace life despite it. The fear of loss never completely disappeared, but it receded into the background, overshadowed by the joy of each day spent with the family she and Rand had created together. On the 10th anniversary of her return to San Bernardino, as they sat on that same porch watching their children play with the horses in the paddock, Rand squeezed her hand gently. "Any regrets?" he asked, a question that had become something of a tradition between them. Olivia smiled, watching as their son helped his little sister onto the back of a gentle mare, a descendant of that long-ago foal named Hope. "Not a single one," she replied, and turned her face up to his for a kiss that still held all the promise of their beginning.